Hello, Richard here, and today I've got something a little bit different for you, something I hope that you're going to find interesting, and this is going to be where old school woodworking meets old school metalworking. And what I mean is we're going to take this old school wood plane, a hand wood plane, just Stanley No.5 Jackplane, and using old school metalworking techniques, i.e. hand scraping, we're going to flatten the sole of this plane, the sole being the bottom surface here. We're going to flatten this to within hopefully a few 10,000ths of an inch. Now, before we start, I'll put in a big fat disclaimer, which is, in this video, I'm not advocating that hand scraping a wood plane down to 10,000ths of an inch is in any way necessary or required or in any way superior to the usual ways of flattening a plane. So if you're a woodworker and you're used to flattening a plane by basically lapping it on abrasive paper on a flat surface, carry on doing that. That's absolutely fine. This is really just a sort of mainly for entertainment, I suppose. You know, this isn't going to be a tutorial on hand scraping or a tutorial on planes particularly. I just hope you find it interesting, the sort of overlap between the two skills. As I say, I hope you find it interesting to see the end results. One of the main reasons I'm doing this is A, because I can, because I'm mainly a metal worker and I also like doing a bit of woodwork as well, especially hand woodworking, using hand tools. This gives me an excuse to practice my hand metal scraping. So this is a nice piece of cast iron. Well, it will be a nice piece of cast iron when we finished it. So this is a good candidate for scraping. Now, metal scraping works best on cast iron, really. You can scrape other metals, but traditionally, cast iron gives the nicest and easiest results. Also, it means I can flatten this plane, because I can tell you now this plane is not flat. I bought this at a car boot sale, and I think I paid £20 for it. I've made a new set of totes for it. So it had originally it had the black resin totes, which were really horrible, and they got all sweaty and horrible. So I've made some new totes out of some English elm. But the rest of it needs sorting out. So I want to turn this into a functional jack plane, because I don't have a jack plane other than this one. So that's another reason. Another reason is it's going to look really nice when it's done as well. It gives a very attractive finish and a very slick finish. One of the reasons we do hand scraping and actual metal work is because it's pretty much the best finish for sliding surfaces. So if you've got two metal surfaces that slide, if you hand scrape the surface, and we'll come to that in a moment, the very nature of the surface, you get slight irregularities that makes the surface very slippery, as it were. So by scraping this, I should get a nice, smooth, slippery finish, and it should slide over the wood nicely. So in a moment, I'll show you the tools we're going to use, and I'll show you how it's going to work. And we'll actually start scraping this down and getting this flat. Before that, we're going to look at a few ways of actually measuring the flatness on this, so that we know how out of flatness it is. We know how bowed or warped it is. And we actually will put a measurement on that as well. I'll show you a few ways we can do that. But first of all, I just want to say that this plane, it's a Stanley No.5 and it's a G12-005. As far as I know, this was one that was made in England in about 1984. So that's actually, 40 years old now, believe it or not. Yeah, I did my apprenticeship in 1984, so blimey, time flies, doesn't it? But one of the things with this plane is it's quite horrible. If I show you the finish on this, I don't know whether you can see that on the camera at all, but the finish on this is terrible. Let me see if you can hear this. Can you hear that? That's the sound of my nail scraping along the surface. And the grinding on this is so bad. I reckon they ground this by tying it onto the back of a Reliant Rialto and dragging it down the A10. It's shockingly rough. Compare that, just one moment. Compare that with this. This is a Stanley what's this one? Stanley No.4.5, this one. This is an older model. This is probably 1950s, 1960s, I reckon. It's just lovely and smooth. And okay, I know it's probably been used quite a lot, but if you look on the sides that haven't been used, you know, the sides obviously don't get rubbed on anything. You can see the sides are nice and smooth as well. And looking at the patterns on there, I don't know if you can see that. But on the side, there's just little horizontal lines all the way across, parallel lines that run all the way along. And that shows that this was probably machined on a metalworking machine called a planer shaper, which basically is like a big sort of, it's like a plane in its own right, but a metal plane. And it has basically like a cutter on a ram, and the cutter moves backwards and forwards, one stroke at a time, and just takes off a piece of metal. And you get a nice finish, especially with a plane where it's moving in one direction. Whereas this, the more modern version, I say modern, 40 years old still, it's obviously been ground. You can just see the little flecks. There's no continuous parallel lines. So this has been ground, and it's just been ground quite cheap and nastily. And to be honest with that, you can't really plane with this because it's so rough that it's actually going to sort of stick to the wood. And if you try and move this in any way sort of sideways, it's just going to It's just not going to happen. So this needs to be fixed anyway. So there's two problems with this. First of all, it's rough as you like and just horrible. And the second one is it actually is bowed as well. So we're going to need to fix that. Right, now to help us do this, here is a thing I prepared earlier. Let me just move some of this out of the way. This is, I made this box, I call it a shoe. And this is made out of bits of plywood and pine and stuff like that. And you can see it's shaped on the inside and it's designed to fit the plane. And what I can do with this, I can actually take the plane and I can fit it upside down in the box. And then that gives it a really good working surface to scrape it in on. I can clamp this to a bench and this will give us a solid surface to work on. But also it's going to help us to measure it as well. And that's the next thing we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is get a straight edge and some feeler gauges, and we're going to just see just how flat or otherwise this is. Right, so here I've got a straight edge. This is quite an accurate straight edge. I know I've checked this on a engineering surface plate, and I know that this is good to within about half a thou over its length. So I'm pretty confident that this is straight and level. So what I'll do, let's put this on the plane. Now I've wound the iron out of the way, so the iron isn't sticking out at all. So I'll hold this on the edge. And I can already see daylight under here, but I don't know whether you'll pick this up on the camera, but I'll put a torch behind it. Hopefully you'll be able to see that there's light shining through. I'll move it to the back end as well. We'll see how that looks. So hopefully you can see that there's some daylight under there. Daylight, torchlight, you know what I mean. But the other thing we can do is we can use some feeler gauges and we can actually measure what the gap is underneath there. So if I pick something like, let's start with 0.02 of a millimetre. So I'll put this in the middle, let's put it there. And then what we'll do, we'll just get the feeler gauge and we'll just see if we can fit that underneath. And the feeler gauge just goes straight under in the middle. And I can slide it quite a way along before it binds on anything. So that's telling me that the ends are high. So this is basically bowed this way. And that was 0.02 millimeters. Let's go up a bit. Let's try 0.04. Let's go to 0.05. Let's be reckless. 0.05 millimeters. So we'll try that, see if that will go under. Okay, so we've got 0.05. And that goes under really easily. There's no problem with that at all. So we've got a gap of at least 0.05 millimeters there. So we keep going up and we'll try, what should we try next? 0.08. And 0.08 goes under. You try it at the edges as well, just sort of check overall. Goes through there very easily, there's no problem with that. And on this edge, same thing, that goes under quite easily there. So let's try 0.15, that's another step up I've got. So 0.15, so 0.15 won't go. I'm just sort of, do you know, it almost wants to go on that front edge there. It does as well. So I can actually get 0.15 under on that edge, and the closer edge I can just about get it under as well. I mean, I think that's probably, I wouldn't get anything thicker than that, I don't think. The things with feeler gauges, they are all about feel. You know, it's not a question of whether you can like force it under. You just feel, you know, you can feel when it's touching. And like if I put it underneath like this and then I just trap it, it doesn't want to move, you know, so you can feel that it's sort of too tight. We'll try the same on this edge, trap it underneath, and it doesn't want to move. Up here it does though. In fact, it's very free on the side of the mouth of the plane. That tells us that the plane is out of flatness by 0.006 of an inch. Now that might not sound like very much, but the general kind of tolerance for the flatness of a plane, this is according to various standards documents. Most countries in the world will actually have standards where they specify things, even like planes, they'll specify what the acceptable flatness is for a plane, believe it or not. If you look up the British standards on this, the general flatness for the sole of a plane is taken to be about 1/1000 of an inch. So this is 6 thous, so this is way beyond that. And if you think about it, it's not too hard with a decently sharpened plane to take a shaving about 2/1000 of an inch thick. Well, if this is bowed by 6/1000 of an inch, then that means if you put this on a long piece of wood, if you had a piece of wood like this long, that means that if you had the blade out by 2/1000 of an inch, it'd still be 4/1000 of an inch above the surface of the wood. So he doesn't get the blade out by 8/1000 of an inch. And then the trouble is then when the wood's only sort of this far in, you're going to have the full 8/1000 of an inch cut. And then as it moves along, it's going to get less. And it's just generally bad. So we don't want the bottom of the plane to be bowed. We don't want it to be bellied or bowed or out of flatness, which is why we're doing this. Okay, so what I'll do now, I'll take you over to the surface plate, which is something we're going to be using, an engineer's surface plate. And I'll show you another way we can check the flatness. This is a bit more engineering. Again, it's over the top. You don't need to do this in real life. As I say, if you want to flatten your plane, abrasive paper, a piece of flat glass, rub it on there till it gets a uniform finish. That's good enough. But anyway, we'll go over to the surface plate. I'll show you that because that's going to be figuring in how we actually then use this tool, the hand scraper, to actually make this flat. So let's do that. Right, now this is an engineer's surface plate, albeit quite a small one. It's not the smallest you can get them. This one's 12 inches by 12 inches, 300 millimeters by 300 millimeters, and it's basically a block of solid granite, and it's about, if I measure it, about that thick, so probably 2.5 inches thick, probably 60 mil thick. And the idea is it's meant to be really, really sort of solid and rigid and non-moving. And the surface has been precision ground or finished, probably lapped. It's basically been finished to within, on this one, I think just under 3 microns. So this is incredibly flat. The flatness of this is within about a 10,000th of an inch. We'll be using this to actually flatten the plane later. But before that, I'm just going to show you a way of measuring the flatness of the plane using some engineering tools. And this is not something you need to worry about, but I thought, you know, out of interest, I'll show you how it works. So if you're more of a woodworker than a metalworker, you might be interested to see how we can measure flatness using other means in the world of metalworking. So we've got the surface plate, and I've got these. These are what's known as parallels, and these are precision ground pieces of metal, and there are 2 of them. That's why they're parallels. If there was only one, it wouldn't be parallel because there'd be nothing for it to be parallel to. I suppose it'd be parallel with itself. Anyway, I digress. So anyway, these are basically exactly the same height. They're dead square, they're parallel. So what I'm going to do, I'll put one at each end, and then we're going to take the plane, and we'll just give it a bit of a clean off, just wipe it with our hands. And the blade is retracted, so the blade isn't going to cut me unless I press really hard. So we'll clean the surface off, and we'll just carefully balance the plane across the 2 parallels. See if I can do this without clunking anything. Okay, so we got the plane resting on the parallel. So what this means now is that the bottom of the undersurface of the plane, so the sole of the plane, should now be dead parallel with the surface plate. And because of that, we can then use this device here, which is a surface gauge. And the surface gauge has a dial gauge on it, and the dial gauge has a little lever, and that's very sensitive to movement. On the dial here, you can see there's graduations. You've got 0, 5, 10, 15. 0 is obviously 0, 5 is 5/1000ths of an inch, 10 is 10,000ths of an inch, and so on. Each major division within those is 1/1000th of an inch, and the dots in between, the little dots, they're 0.5 so they are 5/10,000ths of an inch, the small dots. But we're only really concerned with the big numbers here, so we've got 0 at the end, and what we can do then is we can sweep this along, and this will actually measure the height of the plane above the surface. And we're just looking at the difference in height, really, so we're not looking at an actual height. But there you can see we're already up to sort of 0.03 of an inch, nearly 0.04 of an inch. And if you remember with the feeler gauges, we measured 0.06 of an inch with feeler gauges, 0.15 millimeters. And there we're up to about 0.05 of an inch, 0.06, 0.07 we just hit there. It's quite bumpy. You can actually see the sort of the bumps and humps from the rough grinding. So you can see how bad the grinding is. You can actually measure it with a dial gauge. It's that coarse. So we go along here, 0.06, still about 6, and we'll sweep all the way to the end. We're getting near the throat now. 8,000, 9, nearly 10,000th around about the mouth of the plane there. 10 thou. So about 1/4 millimetre there, 0.25 millimetres, and we carry on. And what we should see is the error then tail off back to 0 as we go back towards where the parallel is at the front. And there we go. We're almost, well, they're practically 0. So you can see we verified how far out it is, and using this you can actually get more of a kind of an idea of the sort of shape of the error as well. It gives you a very visual way of seeing the sort of how bent things are. But like I say, this is kind of just a bonus thing I thought I'd show you. It's not really necessary for what we're doing. So the next thing we're going to look at is the tools we're going to use and the techniques we're going to use to get this flat to within about a 10,000th of an inch. The technique we're going to use on this is basically we're going to take some blue. This is Stewart's Micrometer Engineer's Marking Blue. There's different brands, different types of this. But basically what we do is we take some of this blue. This is like, it's like blue oil paint really. It's quite horrible stuff. Well, what we do is we take some of this, we put it on the surface plate, we get a roller, and we'll roll out a really thin film of blue all over the surface plate. Then what we do is we take our plane, again, just making sure that the blade is actually retracted. We put this on the surface plate on top of the blue, and then we just rub it around gently. We don't put any weight on, just under its own weight, rub it around a little bit. And when we turn it the other way up, the blue will have just stuck on the high spots. Then what we do is we take our Acme shoe for the plane, we put the plane in there and we'll clamp it down, and then we take a tool like this. This is a scraping tool, a hand scraping tool, and we take a tool like this and then we basically just scrape the blue bits off. When we scrape the blue bits off, we clean it up, we take it out, put it back on the surface plate, and we rub it around again gently, and then when we look on the bottom, we should find that the blue starts to creep into larger and larger patches. And as you go, the blue will spread further and further over the surface until you've got blue over the whole surface. And then basically once you've done that, once you've got blue over everything, then you know you're flat. I'll show you this from start to finish. Just say this isn't a scraping tutorial as such. I just like to show you how it's done and so you can see the end results of it. So I've squirted out a little bit of blue in the corner here. So we'll just pick a bit of that up on the roller. Quite a lot here actually, but it's quite a big surface. So then we'll just start spreading this around. This goes a lot easier as well. If you lift up the roller at the end of each stroke, rather than just holding it down, you can develop spots in it. So I find picking it up and moving it makes it easier. So we're just going to get some blue down over where the plane's going to be indicated, as it were. We'll put a fairly thick coat down to begin with. As you scrape something down, you get it more accurate. You tend to use less and less blue on it because you don't need such a big thick coating to see what's going on. But we'll see how that does. We'll even that out a little bit. So let's see what we've got to begin with. Let's get the plane down on the blue. Give it a gentle float around on there. And then we'll take it off, lift it straight up. And that is terrible. That is that is so shockingly bad. It's literally only touching there, 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 and there. So yeah, that's really bad. I'm really glad I'm fixing this because that is just so out of true where it is. No, that tells us not only is it bent this way. So let me show you another way. Not only is it bent this way, it's also bent that way as well. So there's actually a hollow running all the way along the length there as well as in there. So yeah, that's going to be fun. Right, so the next thing we need to do, now we've done that, is to go and scrape the blue off. And to be honest, that won't take very long at all. So let's go to the other bench and have a look at that. Right, so we've got the plane in its shoe and we've got the shoe clamped to the bench. So it's fairly rigid. There's a little bit of play in there. That shouldn't be too bad though. And then all we do, we take our scraper and basically scrape off the blue bits like this. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to come round from a 45-degree angle to that and just go over from another angle, and this helps prevent getting any furrows sort of started off. It's all very rough at the moment. And then when we've done that, we just take a brush and we'll clean that off. And we just take a fine oil stone and I'm just going to rub it over there, just take any burrs off. I mean, there won't really be any at the moment, but just clean it up a little bit. And then back over to the surface plate and we'll re-indicate it and see what's happened. Probably not a lot, but this gives you the idea anyway. Okay, so back on the surface plate, move it around a little bit and see what's happened. And there you go, look, already you can see that now we're getting blue where we weren't before. So already it's starting to come down into shape. So back over, give it another scrape. Okay, that's quite interesting. You can see already now we're starting to pick up a little bit of blue here. So that shows that the hollowing here was really quite subtle, you know, a fraction of a thousandth of an inch probably. But we're starting to pick up a little bit of blue in the middle. So we're already coming in. It's the blue's starting to move down this edge. And then on the other end, again, it's starting to thicken up a bit. So really it's a case of that now. Rinse and repeat this, keep going until we get much more of an even pattern over it. Now I won't show you the whole process. This can take quite a long time to do. But what I'll do is I'll get on and do a bit more on it, and then I'll bring you back in when I've got more to show you. Right, I've been scraping now for probably about 15 minutes or so. I've started to scrape it quite heavily, just to rough things down a bit. And you can see now from the pattern we're actually getting somewhere. So if we look over the back here, you can see the blue pattern is now starting to spread along. It's in big lumps. There's lots of big sort of divots in there still. But that's because we're just roughing it down. But you can see every blue bit basically is the same height now. So we're starting to get rid of some of that bowing. And it still dips in the middle, but it's much more level across the width. And then if we look at the front here, again, similar story. If I can get the light for you. So you can see the blue areas are where we've got contact. And again, the blue areas are all now the same height. Now, interestingly, you can start to see we're just starting to pick up a little touch of blue here, just behind the mouth of the plane. So that's good news as well. That means we're starting to sort of get it flat, and there's little hints of it here as well. So it's coming in. It's coming in quite quickly on the front, but I think there's still quite a lot of work to do on the back. You can see how far we've got to come. And even now, even saying that, there's still, you can see there's blue areas here. So it's starting to happen much more quickly now. So that's only after about 15 minutes or so of scraping. So it might sound like a really tedious way of doing it, but it's actually quite therapeutic to do. It's quite enjoyable to do, I find. And it doesn't have to take that long either, necessarily. Now, something else I will say, you might notice that I've taken the totes off the plane, the handles. I've taken those off. And the reason for that is that, as I say, the totes were all nicely handmade by me in some English elm and coated with Danish oil to make them all nice. And what I didn't want to really do is to be sort of, grabbing them with grubby mitts like this. You get very dirty from doing this. You get blue and iron dust and all kinds of stuff. So I didn't want us to be impregnating that back into the handle. So they've come off. But importantly, what I've done is I've left the frog and the cap iron and all this assembly is still in there. And that's important because when you remove this, it's likely that the plane's actually going to relax a bit and spring. And then when you bolt this back in, it's going to bend. It might not seem like it. You might think, well, this is cast iron, it's really stiff. It's not quite as stiff as you can imagine sometimes. And just having all this fitted in here means that I'm actually going to be leveling this in its sort of working configuration. That's why I've left the iron in. If I took it all out, then I'd probably scrape it dead flat then I'd put this back in, screw it up, and it would bend it. So that's why we've done that. Right, well, I'm going to carry on scraping, and again, I'll bring you back in when we got something to show. Okay, well, it's the next day, and I've done another sort of 20 minutes or so worth of scraping on this, and you can see now how it's starting to really come in. All the blue is the what's now flat, so you can see the blue has now gone from just being these very far corners to actually encroaching all the way across, and it's starting to come around here, and you can almost see like a little curve around here, just a little sort of where the hollow is. So you can see that that's sort of giving us an idea where the hollow is. We've got blue just behind the mouth, which is handy. So that means that's starting to level up. So this blue here is level with all this blue here. There's a little bit of a low spot right on the very front of the toe there. But this is all coming in quite well. But what I'll do is we'll go over to the other bench and we'll get the straight edge on and see what the feeler gauge is saying, and see if we can measure how much we've actually taken this down so far. All right, now if you remember, previously we had 0.15 millimeters of gap in the middle. So if I put the straight edge on here and I rest it on the 0.15 gauge, well, now the straight edge rocks on that. So it's smaller than 0.15. So let's go down a little bit more. Let's go down to 0.1. And again, what I'm going to do is just rest. I'm going to put the feeler gauge down and rest the straight edge down on top of it. And again, it's rocking quite a lot actually, so it's definitely not 0.1. We've taken off at least 0.05 millimeters already. So let's try, what have we got? 0.05 of a millimeter. So this is about 2 thou, this feeler gauge. And I'll rest it underneath. That won't move either actually. And if I put it to the edge, I can just get it under here. See, I can get it under there. But it doesn't want to slide very far either way. In fact, it hardly wants to slide at all there. I can get up to here. So we're looking now, I can actually feel that just slightly catching. So we've gone down already from about 6 thou of bow, and we've gone down to about 2 thou or 0.05 of a millimeter. So 0.15 millimeters down to 0.05 already. So that means that we're getting pretty close now. Not too much to take off. So this should come in quite fast now, and we should end up with that nice blue pattern all the way along the whole thing. It's got some mineral spirit on a fine oil stone here, so we'll just put that over the surface just to remove any burrs on there. And hopefully you can see there the kind of finish that we're aiming to get now. You can see it starts to get almost like a pearly kind of finish on the iron, instead of this really rough ground finish you still see in the middle. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. We've got a lot of scraping to do yet. There's a bit of refining to do afterwards as well, but we're definitely on our way. So more scraping, then I'll bring you back in a while. Right, another quick update. It's starting to come together quite well now. This has been about another half an hour, so not too much work. And you can see now we're getting a really quite a heavy blue coverage pattern over here. Got a slight little low spot just here where it's not picking up. That will, that's not very far off. There's a little bit, it's a little bit lower around the mouth. You can still see grinder marks there, just by the mouth of the plane. The back end is all looking pretty good as well. The pattern's starting to creep down here now. And you can see we're kind of left with just a little hollow in this area. So we're about right here. We're picking up blue spots there, so that's getting quite level, even though you can still see some sort of signs of the old grinder marks in there. But this is basically where we're heading down to now. We're probably under a thousandth out now over the whole thing. And to be honest, you could use it like this. This plane would be pretty accurate now. Over this whole length here, we should be under a thousandth of flatness all the way along there. But we'll keep going until we've got the whole area covered, because it's nice to have that surface finish. It gives this surface finish that the scraping gives you is a very smooth, sort of silky finish. And it feels very nice when you're planing over the wood. The plane tends to skate over the wood quite nicely. Something else I want to talk about quickly as well, while I remember. We spoke about the tools you'd need, and I said you need a surface plate, and that these are about £80 each in the UK, and that you would need blue and also a roller to put the blue on the surface plate. You could use fingers to do that. You could rub it on your hands if you want to end up looking blue. Some people use a bit of cotton to spread it about. It's up to you. If you get a roller though, you want to get yourself a sort of nice printer's roller, a nice quality firm roller. It needs to be smooth. It needs to be smooth and firm. So this is like rubber. But anyway, that's that. These aren't mega expensive. But on the subject of the actual scraping tools, these are sometimes a bit more expensive. So if you wanted to try this yourself, if you wanted to get the kit to do this, the surface plate is about £80 UK. This is probably about £10 or $10, maybe 15 for one of these, a decent one. These more like 70 or £80. These are actually quite expensive, mainly because they're scarce. Not many people do hand scraping these days. So scrapers like this are actually quite hard to come by, especially in the UK. This one I bought from a guy, he's a YouTuber actually, really good guy, called The Impractical Machinist, and he sells these on eBay. So this is the one I bought off him, off eBay. And you might notice the handle here. When he sold this, he actually sold it at a slight discount, and he sold it as the "oh no, it's on fire" limited edition, because when he fitted the handle to the tang, it caught fire. And he decided that it would actually look quite good if he just varnished it. And I tend to agree, I kind of like that. So a little bit of uniqueness there. But this is a carbide tip scraper. So the tip is, I think it's tungsten carbide is what the insert's made of. And it's very, very hard, very tough. Now, you don't have to spend sort of £70 on a carbide scraper. This was my first scraper. This is a steel scraper. It's just plain steel. Well, I say plain steel, it's probably high carbon steel. This was also from eBay. This cost me about £8 delivered. This was from RDG Tools on eBay. I have no affiliation with them. They're just good guys to deal with, and they've seen me all right in the past. So this is a steel scraper. That's what I used originally when I first started scraping. And I also have this one, which is, another steel scraper. And this one I got from a car boot sale. You can pick these up at flea markets and things like that. And this is a Moore and Wright steel scraper. And this one I've actually ground the tip to be a bit more skinny. I don't know if you can see, if I compare the two there. Can you see that? This one's more like a sort of knife blade for getting into smaller areas. And you can use steel scrapers. Now, the problem with using a steel scraper is they go blunt really, really quickly. By the time you've scraped from here to here, you're having to grind the tool again. And on a big plane like this, you'd probably be having to grind it twice for every pass. Whereas with a carbide tool, such as this, I haven't done anything with this yet. And I can actually flip this around and there's another 2 cutting edges on the back end as well. So carbide just lasts for so much longer. So if you're going to do any serious amount of scraping, or you're going to do it as a regular thing, then it's definitely worth the investment in one of these carbide tip scraper. Now, you don't have to use one of these sort of posh ones with the removable insert. What a lot of people do is they'll get an old file. Let's say this was actually like just a metal file, grind it down, get some carbide, and then just braze a piece of carbide to the end, and that will do. The only other thing with carbide, as I say, I don't want to make this into a massive tutorial on scraping, but the only thing to consider with carbide as well is that a steel scraper like this, you can just grind this on a regular grinding wheel, and you can hone it on a regular whetstone or whatever you want. Carbide, you can only sharpen this either on a green grinding stone, which would be too coarse for what you need anyway, so you really would need like a diamond wheel to grind these on. So there's a little bit more to it. But as I say, if you intend to do any serious amount, then one of these. If you just wanted to scrape a plane flat, yeah, use one of these, but you just be prepared. You're going to be back to the grinder sort of every sort of few minutes just to give it a bit of a touch up. All right, well, got a bit more work to do on this to get rid of this last bit. So I'll see if I can get the blue pattern all over the sole of the plane, and then we'll come back and look at refining things a bit. Okay, so here it is, all finished. It's all scraped now. I've carried on, did the rest of it off camera because it's all pretty repetitive after what you saw me do before. But hopefully you can see now the kind of effect that we've been going for with this. Gives it this really nice, I think, sort of pearly, glistening finish. And if you're looking at this and you're sort of thinking it all looks rather battered and dented and that it doesn't look particularly smooth, what you need to bear in mind is that the difference between all the bright spots and the dark spots on here are so fine. You're probably talking about a 10,000th of an inch in difference in height. This is a dead smooth finish on here. And what I've done, I've actually carried it onto the sides. So I've flattened the sides down a bit as well. Done that on both sides. And as I say, I think it gives it a really nice, attractive finish. It's a very slippery finish as well, because even though this is a flat surface, as I said, the sort of high spots and low spots between the different scrape marks are about a 10,000th of an inch. So it means that the plane will tend to sort of glide just on its high spots and not the entire surface area. So we should find it will glide a little nicer on the wood as well. Now, something else that I came across when I was doing this that I hadn't really thought of before was the flatness of the sides of the plane. Now, we don't really use the side of the plane in doing woodwork. You know, it doesn't actually sort of serve a purpose particularly, other than the times when you've been, say, planing a piece of wood, and then you hold the plane on its side and use it as a straight edge, and you would look underneath to see if there's any daylight. So for that, you want the side of the plane to be pretty straight as well. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I found on this that if you looked at it this way, the side of the plane was straight all the way along here, and then the front kicked out by about 1/4 of a millimetre to the side. Not a huge amount, and you know, 1/4 of a millimetre might not matter to you for what you're doing. You know, we've all got different sort of different requirements as to how accurate we like things to be. But what it means is, say you're planing a piece of board flat with this, and you hold this on the side as a straight edge, you might see daylight through there. And if you saw daylight, it would be because the plane's bent, not the wood. Anyway, I took a bit of time just to flatten the sides down. That took a little bit of doing on one side. The other side wasn't too bad. One side was better than the other. But yeah, that's basically the sort of the finished result. So what we'll do, we'll get it back on the surface plate with our measuring gear, and we'll indicate it, and we'll actually measure just how flat this is now. Okay, so I've got the plane back on the surface plate, And I've got my two parallels underneath the plane, so the plane is spaced off in height. Sole of the plane should be dead parallel with the surface plate. And we've got the surface gauge here, and I've dimmed the lights a little bit, so hopefully there's no glare on the dial indicator there. So we'll just pop this under the far end, and you can see, hopefully there, you can see we've got 0. And again, remember, this is a half thousandth gauge, so every dot is 5/10,000ths of an inch, or half a thou, and every sort of whole division here is 1 thou. So from 0 to 5 is 5 thou. So we're about on 0 there, and we'll sweep along. And with this is going to be sweeping over that surface finish, so you can sort of see how fine the dents and scratches are. And the needle will move as it goes over those, so you'll see little fluctuations, but we're not too worried about little fluctuations because this is going to ride on the high spots, really. I'm trying to move this quite carefully. So you can see we're still hovering around 0, maybe a few 10,000ths of an inch. And we're getting sort of towards the middle. Say the odd little sort of fluctuation is probably just a little dent, maybe where I scraped a little hard. But again, what we're aiming for is just getting the sort of the average dead flat, which is what we're doing here. So there, a few 10,000ths. And now this is going to fluctuate a bit when we get near the mouth of the plane. I didn't manage to get all of the old grinder marks out there, so it was actually sort of a little bit lower around the mouth, but so you can see there it's starting to go a bit astray, so ignore that, that's to be expected, right around the mouth of the plane. And here we're sort of back to 0 again, and we'll just keep going, keep moving, and we're looking about, oh, there you go. It moved up to about 5/10,000ths of an inch, but that was probably just in a little dent in the scraping. And we'll come up to the end, and there we're probably about 2/10,000ths. Bear in mind this might have a little bit of stiction in it as well, which in metric that's about 5 microns, or half 1/100th of a millimeter, or 5,000ths of a millimeter overall. So quite an improvement over the 6,000ths that we had initially. So we've gone from 0.15 of a millimeter of difference in level on the sole of the plane to 0.005 of a millimeter in difference in flatness. So that's pretty darn flat. Right, well, there you go. Old school metalworking meets old school woodworking. And now I've got a really nice, attractive looking plane for my £20 car boot sale find. New set of handles, scraped in flat to within 2/10,000ths of an inch. So yeah, really happy with the end result of that. Tool for life there now. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that entertaining, if nothing else. And as always, thanks for watching.